Good day. Welcome to Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley, and we're going to dive into women's health into their 40s and 50s, and how is it any different with Kelly Kauffman? She is an online trainer, and she's actually been in the industry for almost 30 years, way more than myself. So I have to give her all the credit for going through the whole era of fitness. And we're going to dive into a fair bit here. We're going to talk about her story, what got her into everything. We're going to talk about how she had to let go of the skinny mindset. We're going to talk about what honesty pants are. And is it any different for women in menopause as far as training and nutrition goes, and much more. So I'll let Kelly tell her story because she's got a lot to tell you and a lot to learn from, especially if you're interested in women's health and fitness into their 40s and 50s. So without further ado, here is Kelly Kauffman. Good day, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me today. This is going to be fun.
Really fun, really fun. And I mean, this is where I'm even getting to know you. We share, a fellow mentorship, but we don't know too much about each other. So I get to really just ask you questions about that. And I don't do too much of a precursor intro. So I'm going to ask you very genuinely, tell me about yourself. Tell me how you grew up and what led you into doing what you're doing today.
Oh gosh. Well, I feel like it's been a long road. My name is Kelly Kauffman. I'm an online fitness, nutrition, and fat loss coach, but I am also a personal trainer and a yoga instructor. I'm all about balance in life. I've been working full-time in the fitness industry for almost 30 years now. And I started at Ballet Total Fitness as a personal trainer and worked full-time there for 10 years before transitioning and doing in-person special conditions personal training. And along the way, I had gotten yoga certifications, I'd gotten nutrition certifications because I needed CECs, and have put that into practice, and then started health coaching as well. And then when COVID hit, I went online like many of us did. So I now do a little of everything. I still teach in-person yoga. I still do in-home private practice, doctor recommended personal training with specialty conditions. And then I do fat loss coaching programs for women as well.
That's really cool. And I love hearing how long you've been in the industry. I think that's incredible. And I think that just tells you so much about your experience. People underestimate that. And I know for myself, you start in the industry, you think you understand it all. And man, I was so dumb. And I'm more than willing to bet, I am willing to bet a lot of money that 10 to 20 years from now, I'm going to say, man, I was pretty dumb back then. But that's the important thing of experience in the workplace. So I want to know, though, what was your influence? Because this is a really key thing to me, what makes a good coach is what influences you to get into fitness. So what was your influence to be like, I want to be a trainer? Because that's a hard decision to want to make.
Right. It's kind of funny because you don't really, I feel like so much of it is, you end up finding the things that you're meant to find. So from a young age, I never felt super sportsy or anything like that. I kind of, tried a softball league late in life, and my parents weren't into that sort of thing. So I was kind of behind the times on all that. And that was before leagues were so very popular. My kids growing up was a totally different experience than me in St. Charles, Missouri, in a small town trying softball. I never felt sportsy or fitnessy. I was a musician. I was in the band. I did marching band and all that. And oddly, what led me to it was I actually ended up I was briefly in the Air Force Reserves as a musician. Well, when I went to boot camp at Lackland, Texas years ago, I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it. It was that I felt a big difference in my body being, absorbed and going to boot camp. And I saw a big difference in it. It got me interested in fitness. Music ended up falling away. I went to college for music, but quickly realized I didn't want to spend my whole life in a practice room. But I kept coming back to fitness and decided I wanted to be a trainer. So because I saw that transition in my life, and I never thought before in high school and when I was younger that I could do that. I never saw that as something that I would do. So it just that kind of led me there. It was a transition I never would have thought of.
No kidding, especially starting a band in music. That is
Yeah.
such a great transition. And it's kind of interesting to hear that you didn't have many influences. It's probably, I'd say at least 70 to 80% of the people I talk on here, I was like, oh yeah, I like sports. I was into sports, and then they get into training. And or
Right.
someone had their own fat loss journey of some sort. And
Yeah.
so your journey was more in just the experience, what it sounds like. What was that experience
Yeah.
like going from being a musician, being just, playing music to,
Right.
wow, you're in the military boot camp. What was that like?
Yeah, well, it was very scary. I mean, I was in it for the music of it, not for the military of it. So it was a very interesting summer, and at the same time, it was a definitely. I never felt that I had a lot to lose, but I also never felt like the thin girl. A lot of trainers grow up to be trainers because that's not what they perceive themselves at when they were younger, and that's how I was. I always felt chubby. I felt chunky. I felt like I needed something different, and seeing that transition when I was just thrown into that experience of boot camp for the first time, and seeing the movement and the exercise, and being scared most of the time because they would yell at you, and that was their thing. It was all that was their spiel. They yelled you into it, but I saw the humor in it a little bit. I thought, oh wow, okay, I see what they're doing, and I kind of thought it was cool because I liked the transition. I looked better after boot camp than I ever had, and I was like, wow, okay, there's something to this. And it wasn't immediate, but eventually, when I did make the decision, I kind of drifted. I quit college for music, and just worked at a phone company for a while, and I don't know, and then when I quit that because that dissolved, I was like, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? And I really wanted to be a trainer. So I went to Ballet Total Fitness and got a job at the front desk and started studying for my first certification exam while I was at the front desk, and ended up there for years. So,
That's a really cool transition. Having that kind of like just shift in your perspective. And I totally relate to, like you say, growing up feeling chubby, feeling like,
mhm.
keeping weight off is really difficult. And for me, it became an obsession. And not everyone necessarily falls into it, but it sounds like once you went through the experience of, hey, this is what exercise does for me, then it
Right.
became more rewarding. And it sounds like that's kind of what helped you convert into it. But it does sound like there was a bit of a lull there. And just in terms of you're changing your degree, you're changing your focus. At
Yeah.
this point, were you still really into fitness, still really trying to go after your own personal goals, and then eventually like, hey, maybe I can help people? Is that kind of how it went?
Yeah, but maybe the other way around a little bit too, because I was like, I think a lot of women feel this, and men, I'm sure, but it just has always been a struggle. It was always a struggle, and coming from my thought process of it, I was like, oh, I happened to the company that I was working for dissolved, and I got a gym membership while I was on the severance pay, while I was debating what I was going to do next, and started going to Bally's because I literally didn't have a job at the time, and I was like, oh, and I thought, wow, it just got so exciting for me. And I was at a point in my life where luckily I was able to do that, where I was just moving in with at the time, my ex-husband, but at the time, the person that I was with. And he was like, well, you love the gym. Why don't you just see if you want to do that? And I was like, I really do. Why don't I see about that? Um, but I think I almost in the back of my mind was also feeling like, wow, this would allow me to be able to put the time in for myself and to do something that I love. I know I didn't have it all figured out, but I finally had a lot of time to spend at the gym. And then I was like, well, I'll help others do this, and that's going to help me stay fit as well. That was my thought process in my very young 20s brain. That was
Right.
what I was thinking, and to some degree true, but I learned a lot along the way
Yeah. Yeah, you're
about
going
what.
to, for
Yeah,
sure, with that
yeah,
much time that you've been in the industry. And I think that's really awesome that you just kind of had that, hey, let's just kind of, I'm doing this and stay passionate. That's exactly kind of what happened with me when I was in between careers choices.
yeah.
Essentially, I was wanting to be a carpenter. I thought for sure. I had some really bad experiences, not terrible, but didn't love the industry, didn't love the people in it. But then I was so passionate about doing the training. It was just like, as I was trying to get in shape, I was trying to improve myself. And then
Mhm.
it dawned on me like, hey, if I could just get paid for this, This is
Right.
basic. This is because
To do what I love.
it's so easy to show someone what you love doing. Now, this is
Yeah.
actually a really interesting point too, though, is we do get an amazing access of ease with fitness because our life revolves around it. It's probably one of the
Yeah.
biggest gaps within being a training or a nutrition coach or both, is that if it's your profession, the level of motivation and accountability and even time that you will delegate to these things
Yeah.
is substantially different to really understand and compare what it's like in a regular person's life. Like, it's not the same. It's like being a mechanic and having to take care of a car. Really easy
Absolutely.
for a mechanic, right? So
Yeah.
there is always that gap. But I think for the most part, as long as you try to see it through the lens of where you came from and try to see as much as you can, I think you just can't change much of the motivation part. You have to
Right.
really get people to really have that experience you and I had, is
Hmm.
that first kind of like fitness bug where you're like, I feel the change. This is worth
Yeah.
it. And it's like, you don't have to become a trainer to experience that part. So I think that's
Absolutely.
really cool that you went through that transition to what I think is also really interesting to hear from, because you're still on this trajectory of improving your fitness, right? You're still
Always.
learning a lot, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the big points for you within your own fitness and fat loss journey that, were some of the hardest things to overcome? What were some of the biggest ones for
Yeah.
you to have to overcome?
I think just I am in love with the whole process of, of learning and evolving and growing. And I always have been. So it was really neat to see the process of different bodies and how different everything was. But I think some of the biggest things that I dealt with were, number one, feeling like my body never quite fit the mold of a personal trainer. I still had that imposter syndrome. I still had that thing where I was still chasing something, even as a trainer. And I went into, because I was at Bally's, I also did a lot of group exercise trainings. I taught aqua classes for years. That's how I got into yoga for the first time. And it just never quite felt enough. And I felt like I experienced a lot of what so many women experience just in life, just chasing something that you're not quite getting. And that was a big struggle for me. My yoga training, when I started doing yoga certifications, was really helpful for mindset and for letting myself be who I am and really finding my self-worth, and that, you know what, no, I do have a voice. Because do you know how many people want to see somebody leading them that feels and looks like them, instead of somebody that's, the the typical, especially back in the 90s, the size 2, the 20, the mold of what a female trainer was thought to have been like. It was a struggle, but it also helped me grow into things. And I think another thing that was a struggle for me was I did not have the nutrition piece. I mean, I was a legit personal trainer for years, and I kind of liken it to, it's funny because people do this a lot, even with certain general practitioner doctors that have not had a lot of nutrition training. Personal training is not nutrition training. It's different. And so I was chasing something, but I did all the typical things. It was a real struggle because I still wanted to look different than what I was. I went through years as a trainer, kind of, not really sharing it because I'm supposed to be this trainer, but on the same end, I was still going through the fad diets. I was still trying this and trying that. I still went through trying all these things and not having the nutrition training behind me to have the nutrition piece down. Therefore, I was burning the calories off through my movement, which is never the way we want to do it. Ultimately, we want nutrition to be the driver of fat loss. And especially because I taught a lot of college classes, I would teach 9 aqua classes a week where I was up on deck, bouncing around in the humidity, like jumping like crazy, trying to get everybody to work out. Well, then there'd be a break in between every semester. I did a lot. My exercise would shift a lot from, oh, you're going to, 9 to 12 classes of moving. And then you'd have a few weeks break or a month break or a month and a half. And so I would go through these struggles, and it was because the nutrition piece wasn't there. And I was burning off my calories. I was chasing my fork, but you can't do it.
Yeah.
So those were the main struggles, just learning to be who I am, being okay, and knowing it's not about a size. However, it is about health. And now my goals and my reasonings behind them are so much different than what they were for so many years. I'm no longer chasing something, but now I really just love the way I feel, and I want to empower women to be stronger and to have longevity, to have mobility, to be, because we're better for everyone else if we are strong and healthy. And so many women that are my age weren't taught properly to even have strength overload as a part of the process, more or less the nutrition piece as well. So
All really great points that you have there of your journey. And I think anyone should really value, especially when it comes through thinking about the era that you really had your career on, because you were ahead of me in your career, way ahead of me. And I thought I kind of picked up in the fitness industry right before strength training kind of became a thing. And you think about when you started, as you mentioned, like the size 2 people, it was, all
yeah.
the tiny models, and I,
Right, yeah.
the
And the toning and the lifting with lighter weights and
yeah, and it
the
was
3 and
skinny.
5 and 8 pound dumbbells.
It was very much promoting a very thin physique still. Like if I look back at
Yeah,
even just the movie films and some of the main actresses, and I'm looking back at 90s, early 2000s, and the main actresses that are, who you'd always be like, oh, that's the really pretty girl. I'm
right.
like, my goodness, girl, eat some meat. Like this, you just see how light these women are. And it's been so interesting. So I think that's really cool that you come from that lens, that you've seen a lot of the fitness, really evolution essentially, because you went from that
Absolutely.
toning into, and how long has it been now that weights have been a thing? Maybe 10 years. And
Right.
now it's coming into the forefront that we're understanding it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing I want to actually make a point of that you had mentioned that was really cool is trainers in nutrition is actually a really tough thing,
It
because
is.
when you think about it, and I heard this from John Berardi, who was this guy who started Precision Nutrition, which is an
Mhm.
online certification course for trainers. And what he had said is the trainers are the frontline workers of the healthcare industry. And it was like, wow, like, yeah, like before you go see your doctor or anyone, like the best chance you have is your personal trainer. But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, you're not even really given enough tools for the nutrition, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, oh, yeah. And going through precision nutrition is one of my nutrition certifications. I mean, yeah, it was I had already done one prior to that. So I was aware of it, but it's just so enlightening, because then when I think back on my younger self, I'm like, wow, I mean, I was trying. I always would read books and try and have knowledge, but as you know, and my clients know, you can read books there are so many books that say completely different things. We were
Yeah.
struggling too, and we were the ones being asked. If people that had trainers, they were asking. And until nutrition training really came to be what it is now, yeah, that wasn't as much of a possibility. I wasn't going to, nor did I have the capacity to stop training and go to college to become a registered dietitian. It wasn't as popular to be able to get training. So it's just been very enlightening, and it was like mind blowing when it just was so exciting to put all the pieces together and to see, like, oh wow, it's crazy that we can make such an impact, and it made such a difference in my life. So I just want to share it with women, because so many women, especially women 40s and up, I am 52 years strong, and I just know people in my age range, they don't. So many of them still have those attachments of what we learned when we were younger, when we were maybe thinking about that more before we had our kids, before life got crazy. And now when they get to be empty nesters, or their kids are old enough and they start thinking about fitness again, they go back to they reflect back on what they knew way back when, and it's so different now.
So different. The way that we've seen, especially in the nutrition industry, has been like
Yeah,
just terrible. Like fitness has evolved, I think, from our understanding. And it's just, strength was seen as something that athletes and bodybuilders do. Like it just wasn't, obvious
right.
in the research. This was the healthy thing. And now it's very evident it's the most important form of training. But when it comes to nutrition, it's just really a complete, just crazy political landscape now. It's to this day, it's like it's actually so hard to understand who to trust, as you had mentioned. And
Right.
I see this in, all people, but especially, you have people in your generation and older, and my mom's a good case of this, where they're trying to understand it, but because they're reading those books and they're listening to this person and that person, the amount of fear mongering that's going on, it makes people feel completely, disempowered. Like you just,
Right.
this is poisonous, that's poisonous. And then you think back to all the things, like you said, that they used to know. They're afraid of meat. They're afraid of cholesterol, afraid of egg. My dad's terrified of eggs. Like
Yeah.
this is the worst thing is, as I mentioned, like we are way more of a frontline personal life worker than a doctor is when it comes to fitness and health. A
Yeah.
doctor can help you a lot with medicine and disease, but his doctor told him, yeah, you can have 4 eggs a week. And I'm trying to tell him
Right.
to have 5 in the morning. And he's a big guy, like he can handle it. But it's just, the challenge of that old generation of information. And
Yeah, it is challenging, yeah, it's challenging because everybody, um, they're trying to ask the right people. They're trying to ask people that are knowledgeable, but it's hard to even know. It's hard for people to even know.
when were some of your big education pieces? Because again, you've been in the industry for a while. I can even kind of pinpoint some of my big ones were actually within the last few years when I
Yeah,
really dove into hearing different perspectives, because I was very much like, I learned one way and I stuck to it. But then I
right.
realized more information was coming out. When were some of your big information pieces, and more specifically in the nutrition, because that was so hard for us as trainers to understand?
Right. I think it was just so enlightening when I dove into my first nutrition training, and that was Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and they were very, as we want to be, they were very agnostic. It was great because it gave you a real overview of different styles of eating, and so I loved that because I know everybody's going to have their own perspective, and everybody's going to have the things that they want to do for whatever reason that feels better in their body. So that's very much goes along with what I know from yoga. And I am a yogi at heart, and yoga is very listen to your body. And it's really made me strong in listening to your own intuition and it having, modifying everything, whether it be diet, nutrition, movements, all of it very much has to be your own from your own lens and something that you feel good about. But then it was also even cooler to really dive into precision nutrition and just learn the basics about how important the macros are and how and why and how and why we need protein, and just like reflecting on the things that I thought I knew way back when, or the things that I realized that I didn't know that I thought were just for bodybuilders. I mean, it was just a huge turnaround. It was a huge difference. And I try and be very letting my clients be who they are. I'm going to find out from them and ask a lot of questions about the food, about their nutritional needs and what they want, what's going to fit in with their lifestyle. I can work with a lot of things, but it definitely changed me personally, because even I think my shift. I did intermittent fasting for a few years before, after my first nutrition training, and before I went into precision nutrition. And that can work fine for some people, but it also works until it doesn't for many people,
Yeah.
because there is no way I could have gotten my amount of protein that I needed when I really started diving in. There's no way. I just couldn't eat enough protein in that system that I personally had adopted in that particular style of fasting. There are a lot of different styles of fasting, and then there are ways that you can make that work. But for me, that was a pivot point for me, a transition, because it worked for me until it didn't. But then I learned why it didn't and what I needed to do to change it. So,
Yeah, it's an evolution of your own identity when it comes to nutrition, interestingly enough. And I find like training, you'll have some evolutions for sure. You'll have some things that you'll evolve to in your sport or in your practice, like yoga and strength training. You're going to have that. But I feel like nutrition is so much more personal and cultural. It ends up creating a lot more of an important evolution of its own. and
Yeah.
you'll have some systems, and then you'll evolve those systems, and you'll find like
Always.
is I'm very similar to yourself, where I did intermittent fasting for even a couple of years on and off, and in the windowed eating and the skipping the morning, and then I just got off it, and I was like, yeah, and I feel okay, like I feel good, like I felt good when I did it. I wasn't
Yeah.
forcing it, and then I went off it, and it still feels good. And I think it's when people get dichotomous on those things, right? Because people are just
Yeah.
so fixated on it
Absolutely.
these days.
And there are some things that I really got out of that that still help me today, because I really do feel like, did it help me learn about satiety? Absolutely. It
Yeah,
helped me to learn a lot about the hunger scale and about all kinds of things. It helped me to have a deeper body awareness. But like I said, it's just, yeah. And I still I think people think of fasting a little too rigidly too, because there are a lot of different ways to think of it. Because I still am not there. I'm not opposed to the idea of closing a window for the evening is a great way to think of it. So you're not getting back in your fridge when
hmm,
you don't need to. I mean, there are ideas from that's I still carry with me into my coaching with clients, and the idea that, you know, planned snacks are great, but we shouldn't really need a lot of snacks if we're eating meals that satisfy us. Things like those, it's still the idea of fasting in certain ways. You can fast between breakfast and lunch, and fast between lunch and dinner. So there are a lot of good things that I take out of it, but I agree. We're just always evolving. I mean, same thing with the coaching business. My systems that I put into place when I first started coaching, even those change and get better along the way as you start seeing, oh, okay, this worked really well, but see if I can add this piece and see, so every time I go through another round of coaching, I feel like you always learn something from clients, just like we're always learning things about ourselves too.
absolutely. I think you should try to be open like that. That's
Yeah.
evolving as a character for sure. One of the other things I wanted to touch on there that I thought was a really important topic, and you being, as you'd said, not like the typical trainer in typical body size. And I think that's very important. It's a very important message for everyone to really embrace their own body. But we're also in a very delicate time where we have healthy at every size. And
Yeah.
I think that this is a very challenging topic. And I would love to hear you speak to that, because I really agree that fitness can come in many different sizes and shapes. But I think that we're getting into a context that isn't as likely as fit in a certain end of the spectrum. It's my
Right.
opinion, but I would love to hear your perspective of that. What should people really consider, especially
Yeah.
for women or men that, might not be the typical perfectly fit person, but should try to
Right.
see themselves, what standard should they hold?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. It's a challenging time. And I also agree there are different shapes and sizes, and they're all beautiful and wonderful and can be fit to a certain degree. But I also know that I did get caught up in the and the thought of thinking that maybe it wasn't possible. I mean, I grew up thinking maybe I'm just big boned. I'm exercising all the time. Why, like, so maybe this is not possible. Oh, and then, of course, going into 40s and I deal with a lot of women in my program, 40s and up, perimenopause, menopause, again, with the idea, assuming, oh, this just isn't possible to get leaner. This isn't something that's going to happen. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think we assume things before we know, because when I put the nutrition piece in place and started understanding that, that protein does in fact burn better than other macros, that it gives us a benefit. When I started accepting and pushing past my resistance on just really counting my calories to see how much I'm actually taking in, as much as clients don't want to do it, it works. It
Yeah.
does work, and yeah, we're all going to be different shapes. I'm a big believer that scale weight is not the end all be all. That's not the form of progress that I'm looking for as as what the goal is. It's all about body composition for me. However, I have my clients track their scale weight in my personal training app because it's helpful. And I have them track their calories and their protein in my personal training app. It is helpful because it's going to get them to see those body composition shifts, to be able to know that they're taking in the right nutrients in the right amounts, to be able to gain strength and ultimately to lose fat And as a side effect, they're going to see the weight loss they're looking for. It's thinking of it as that side effect instead of the main goal, because it takes longer than people expect.
Absolutely. I like that. It's the side effect and not the main goal. I think it's really important that people kind of see it like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think some people get that message, and then some people also get terrified of the scale, unfortunately. And it's a tool, but right?
Yeah.
It's not the be all end all. If anything, you team up any tool that you can. I say you have a visual tool, which is a photo. It's not everyone wants to do it, but it's a photo of proof. Now, if you get caught up in just that, and you get caught up in just the scale, as you mentioned, you might not sustain good body composition, right? Because if you're not doing the strength training and eating the protein, you're not going to keep the lean mass. And it's, to me, kind of a shame. Let's say someone loses a ton of weight. And, I had someone on here just last week who he lost over 100 pounds, but he only did cardio. And so when you think about someone who's overweight, they have a lot of strength inside them. You have to carry around a lot of heavy weight. And you actually just lost a part of your metabolism that way. Like you lost something that you had a right to keep. And so that's super important, and people see that depiction. Now, when you think about what other standards you help them look at as far as body composition, do you have any sort of tools that you use? I know for myself, when I have clients in person, I use some body composition testing with skin folds. Do you use any other tools as far as helping people understand possibly predicting their body fat percentage? Because I know it can be quite challenging.
Yeah. And, honestly, I have my people, because my people are strictly online. I'm no longer doing, back when I was at Bally's, we had the body fat, the calipers and all the old school things back then, but I don't have a DEXA scan, anything like that. But I very much am a big believer in looking at all your forms of progress. I'm telling people to look at your strength, look at your energy, look at how you're feeling, look at your scale weight is a form of progress. Your measurements are a form of progress. I'm big on honesty pants for women. In my program being online, I'm like, anytime you're going to do a monthly measure, I also want you to be putting on honesty pants. Do you know what that is? I'm hoping.
I can imagine it just means pants that are really tight and they make you feel honest.
Yes, you put on the same thing every time, because that's something that, even when people are measuring, there's a lot of variables there. People will, measuring is hard to do on your own. It's hard to do because you may have a different feel for the tape measure. It may be tighter one day, different another day. If you're in different clothes, if you're inhaling, if you're exhaling, measurements are going to be different. But that pair of pants is the same pair of pants every month you put them on. It's the so that's one of my favorite ways for people with a long-term goal to understand that this is not going to happen overnight. I don't want you to think that all of a sudden these pants are going to be falling off of you. They're not. But you're going to start to see that, hey, one of these measures, I can actually button the pants, even if I can't zip them. Then eventually, hey, I can zip these pants. I wouldn't wear them out. They don't look good yet, but I can zip them. So I'm big on that for women, because I just think it really, that's what we're looking at a lot anyway. We're like, oh my gosh, I can't get into my clothes anymore. I hear, how many times I hear I have a ton of clothes still in my closet that I don't want to get rid of. So I like to put that to use. I think that's a really smart way to also just remind people that this is the long game. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint, but you can see little things along the way by having these consistent forms of measuring progress.
That's a brilliant system. One of my favorites, and I forget to bring it up to my clients. I got to standardize it more often, because I always tell people, it's like, because I do only a handful of skin folds, but when I do it, I'm like, this isn't even a guaranteed test, because I can mess up. Like I'm a human that has human error, and we can predict it, but your shirt will always be your shirt. And unless you throw it through the dryer and you tighten it, in which case it's tighter, so you lost more weight. So it's so effective to have people recognize that. And the other thing I want to highlight that's really helpful for people, it doesn't have to be perfectly knowing your body fat percentage. If you're getting stronger in a fat loss program, you're probably going to recomp, meaning gain muscle. And if you're not losing strength, then you're still maintaining muscle. Like that's the major thing, right? So
Absolutely.
As long as you're keeping up, and like you say, it's just look at the whole picture altogether. Like you look at, are you showing up for your strength training 4 days a week? Are you seeing the weight go down? Are you consistent on your protein and your calories? We're heading in the right direction, especially if those pants fit. I think that's so well stated. One of the questions I had based on that demographic I thought was really interesting is how you work with perimenopausal and menopausal women. Now, one of the things I would love for you to speak on, because I speak out of context of not being someone who's going through menopause, so it's hard for people to take my opinion as serious. But what is different when it comes to nutrition and training when it comes to perimenopausal and menopausal women versus any other person's program? What do you see as being the key differences?
Yeah, well, number one, and I do not consider myself an expert on perimenopause and menopause. I just know that, I'm a woman who's dealing with such things, and so I understand it from that perspective and from seeing so many female clients for this many years going through it. Do I think a lot is different in what we need to do? No, I don't think think much is different in what we need to do, but I think the idea has been put out there so much that, I think it's the misconception that people are assuming they don't have that mindset that they can do it, because so many women think that they're broken, think that something's wrong. But I also really highlight mindset coaching during this time, because every woman's experience is different. There are women that are going to take hormones and there are women who aren't. I'm not judgmental. That's a woman's decision, but it speaks a lot to the mindset behind emotional eating and cravings and things like that, because these are actually, women that are taking hormones. It can make a big difference. And I'm not saying that as a good or bad thing. I'm just saying understanding that there are always things chemically going on in our body, whether we're going through any of that stuff or not. There are always little drivers behind. Sometimes you have a craving and you don't realize why until a couple days later when you realize it's your cycle, So I speak a lot to the fact that, hey, just remember, just keep in your back pocket that if you're going through this time of life, that sometimes things are changing behind the scenes that you're not even aware of. So just saying, you know what, taking that pause before you dive into that craving, taking that pause to be like, am I hungry? Am I hungry to the point of needing something to eat, or am I just hungry because I'm in a calorie deficit? Am I, is this the type of hunger I need to listen to? Or is this maybe my emotions talking for whatever reason? But I just think so many women don't, it's such almost like a thing that people are using to drive them to programs, So I think there's a lot of fear mongering about that, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're in menopause, you're not going to be able to lose weight. Well, we know that's not true. That's not true. That's not scientifically true. So it's just these misconceptions. So it's really dealing more with mindset. And I feel like meeting women where they're at. I do that in my personal training practice with disabilities, or with people that have a knee thing or a shoulder thing, because by the time you're our age, everybody almost has a thing. So I do a lot of modifications within my strength program, but within the food program, it's understanding that we also need to modify and understand that some of our urges have meaning behind them. And sometimes if we just put it in perspective, we'll be like, oh, I don't need to listen to that. That's all that's happening right now.
Right. It's so difficult for people to appreciate, or more specifically, it's difficult for women to hear that if you're perimenopausal or menopausal, that the nutrition or training isn't different.
Yeah.
But here's what I do say is it's not any different. It's just fucking harder. Like your life is going to suck compared to mine and anyone else's. You're going to, especially in menopause, you're going to get more uncomfortable. You get hot flashes. You're going to have worse energy. You're going to have worse cravings. It's not fair. But
absolutely,
when someone makes a program or writes an article that says, this is what you need to do when you're on menopause, it's like same information, but it's packaged towards you, and it allows you to feel like there is something wrong with me, right? And it's not really, because it's actually a pretty normal thing to have menopause and perimenopausal. And as you had mentioned, it's not true that you can't lose weight. But when you get to say something like, oh, it's my hormones' fault. And my arguments against the hormones are quite simple. I've done bodybuilding, and many people who do bodybuilding have horrible hormones, like the worst. They still lose weight. And so it's still possible. It's just, it's more difficult for you because, like you say, all those background things that are so difficult. So I love that you make the mindset piece the valuable thing, because that's what's going to make you the individual. It's like, hey, this is just going to be harder on you, but we can give you these coaching tips that'll guide you through that process so you can better control your mindset around what's happening to you. And I think that's really helpful. And
Yeah.
I love hearing how that you mentioned the yoga was a big part of it. So let's dive into the yoga a little bit. What got you into yoga, and what was the kind of big changes you felt in your life from that?
Oh, yoga, well, yoga's magic. It's amazing. I did it just strictly, honestly, for CECs, because personal trainers, to keep their certification, need continuing education credits. So yoga was just one of them that I ended up taking. I had already become a yoga instructor through Bally's, and I really loved it. But I knew, Bally's gave these little weekend certifications, like, okay, you're a yoga instructor at Bally's, but it made me want to dive in and get my 200 registered yoga teacher training. And then now I'm a 500 RYT. So I put in 500 physical hours of practice and years of experience. But I think it's just the moving, because really, like, now mobility is so strong. Like, when you look at fitness content and you look at Instagram and reels and things, there's so much talk about mobility training. Well, that's what yoga is.
Yeah.
Yoga is real life mobility training in action. Yoga is a combination. It's not just stretch, it's strength, it's core work, it's breath, it's mindset practice. And it's all of that in one, in the form of mobility and movement. And I'm really big on, because I'm all about kind of, especially because I have a lot of special conditions, people that I work with, from very debilitated, my people in power chairs and things that I see in my private practice, to my yoga classes that are just all different ages, that, it's all about listening to your body. Yoga meets you where you are. You're never meant to go into a yoga class and to think that you have to look like the person next to you. It's your yoga practice. And I try and teach people how to use their body awareness to listen to their body. And that becomes helpful in more than just yoga. So even in my 8-week program, even though I give them strength workouts, I also give them a weekly yoga sequence, and along with nutritional guidelines and all that sort of thing. But part of it is because I want people to learn body awareness, because, like, strength training is what we do to protect ourselves in life, to keep strong, to build strength, to keep strong, and to keep strong for life activities like yoga and like gardening and like running and everything else we do. But then the yoga is also helping our mobility so that we can be more body aware in our strength training and the other things we do. They just work really well together.
Absolutely. I heard this from Charles Poliquin, very well-known strength coach, and he's one of the godfathers of strength conditioning. And he had said that yoga is the yin to the yang. It's like the opposite side of the strength training world. It's what you need to complement the balance. And I have been trying to do just more mobility work. And I think there's a degree of patience that you really need with it. And that's what I need to lean into myself personally when it comes to trying more yoga. But I love how you mentioned it encapsulates so much more than stretching, and people need to value that, because it's stretching. And you had mentioned, knowing your movement, knowing your body, thinking about your body. And I really believe that the stability is a big part, because it's one thing to hold a stretch, right? If you just stretch your hamstrings or whatever, but if it's passive, you don't really get to keep the benefits from it too much if it's a passive movement, if you're just hanging in it. But if they're telling you to do something that stretches your hamstring and you got to hold it and stabilize it. And then my favorite part of yoga is the breath, because the breath is really the gateway into the autonomic nervous system. And so normally you're feeling tight in some range of motion, and then you have to breathe. It's like, no, be calm here. We can actually feel comfort here. And that's what yoga does so well. And I totally have to agree. When it comes to all this new mobility work, I saw this like probably over 10 years ago. When I'm looking at these movements, I'm like, I think I've seen that movement in yoga. And it's like, oh yeah, do a lunge with a T-spine rotation. You mean like a warrior two pose? Like it's, and this is ancient stuff, right? It's ancient stuff that's come over for so long. I'm curious how often you recommend people do yoga, because I also see, again, it's always a spectrum of fitness. People can do too much strength training. People can do too much running. They could do
Absolutely.
only yoga. And so what is your perspective on the right mix of yoga if you were to give some recommendations?
Yeah. Yoga is something that it is individual. I mean, people can honestly do a daily yoga practice, and that would be okay. It doesn't have to hinder the other things you do. However, it depends on the type of yoga you're doing. Number one, there's hundreds of types of yoga, more than people understand.
Mm.
But a daily yoga practice could look more like a yoga sequence. I do a daily practice in the morning, but some days that's a 10-minute practice. Some days that's a 15-minute practice. I like to move the body in the morning. I firmly believe getting up and down off the floor alone is one of the best things people can do as they age, because I deal with people in, high senior populations that can't get up and down off the floor because they didn't do it, because they weren't doing it on a regular basis. So I believe in yoga in yoga sequences, and I love it as a morning ritual practice. However, I always tell my yogis, don't mistake yoga for overload, because yoga can be overload in the beginning when you first start, because you're not used to lifting your own body weight. When you're not used to a push-up is overload. There comes a point when that push-up is no longer overload on its own. So it's just understanding that strength training with overload and yoga practice are not the same thing. So I want them to support each other. So if somebody were wanting to go into a yoga class, I'm like, do it for yourself for reasons, but also listen to your body along the way. If you were to do twice a week yoga and you already strength train 3 or 4 times a week, which is what I recommend to my people, either a 3-day program or 4-day program, great. You could still do a twice a week yoga, but listen to your body. If you're really sore from your workout the day before, you're maybe going to take some modifications that you wouldn't have. Or, maybe the yoga practice you do is more focused on flexibility and not quite as much a power yoga class where you're doing a lot of strength moves. So it's really, you bend and twist it to fit the mold of what you want and get out of it what you need.
That's very well stated. I really, really appreciate your perspective of the overload. And I haven't heard someone talk about yoga and still mention that, because sometimes when I hear people say that yoga has strength, it's like some movements maybe, but it's more of maybe strength endurance or strength at far end ranges. But when you can at least highlight that point, it's like, hey, is it overloading you, right? Is it actually a challenge?
In the beginning, but not in the way you need to last long term. And we're thinking about the long game with clients. It's not just that I want a client to make a change when they're with me. I want them to learn how tangible it is to live sustainably, to lose fat and keep it off, and and then go into maintenance, and then if they have more to do the long game. I'm just all about that, taking it into our life.
And that perspective is super helpful for people to appreciate, because I think sometimes people get so into yoga like yourself, and then they think they figure it out. Oh, and I get strength from it. It's like you get some strength. Like if you only do yoga 7 days a week or 6 days a week, that's great. Good for you. But it's not the whole picture. And I love that you're addressing this part for, again, a spectrum. Certainly there could be people that's all they can start with, and that's all they need to start with. But the more optimal thing for strength is going to be fundamental movement patterns and actually getting that overload progression. So super valuable for people to hear that. And I'm curious about, because you mentioned how you help people with disabilities. Tell me more about that and what kind of got you into that.
Yeah. Again, I think life takes you where you're meant to be because as a trainer, I was a personal trainer, and I was also teaching a lot of aqua classes. Well, in aqua classes, you get some people with special conditions. I had some people with in the MS community with MS that would go to my aqua classes. Eventually, when I went private in-home, I had some people ask me to train them privately. That led to me deciding to take some courses on special conditions, where I took some courses with a doctor and physical therapy group specifically on how to train people in power chairs, how to effectively do functional strength training to help them for what they need. And then it just kind of grew in my area. There weren't a lot of trainers in my time driving to people's homes. And in my community, where my people are very debilitated, a lot of them can't move their own limbs, or very limited range of motion. the act of getting in the car to meet the trainer somewhere is wearing in and of itself. So when I took this initial training course, and the physical therapist that I took the training course with found out I was going to people's homes, she was like, "Oh, that's interesting." She started passing out my cards, as did some doctors, and I train people all over the St. Louis area that not just MS anymore, but different neurologists have my card, and I do, because I think that combination of personal training and yoga does a lot for thinking outside of the box, because it's looking at, okay, I come to somebody's home to see what they're struggling with. Somebody in a power chair is struggling to lean down and get a casserole out of the oven. Okay, then we need to do some things that simulate a seated deadlift, some things that strengthen those areas. We need to strengthen the areas that are going to help you transfer to do your business, to get to the toilet, to get up and down off of a chair, things like that, for those that even can do that. So anyway, sorry, long answer, but it just led from personal training to having some clients that I wanted to support. And then I went to the right courses at the right time and was blessed enough that they liked me and wanted to spread the word about me doing this. So it kind of became a specialty thing. So I've worked with dystonia, MD, MS, Parkinson's, seniors, and it's really rewarding. But then, it's also hard because I see people kind of at their worst sometimes. And so then when I started online coaching through COVID, all of a sudden it was like a whole other type of rewarding, because then I learned I could help women that can get better, that don't have a disease debilitating them. Mm-hmm. They have fat and weight that they need to lose, and a lot of them are very limited in range of motion or have injuries. And so I'm able to help people in a different circumstance in that way as well.
Well, and it makes you extremely capable of handling more of the healthy population, which I say in quotations healthy, because even the people who are arguably healthy aren't very healthy, and we all come with something. We all got aches and pains, even people who are fit. It's like, well, I beat up my shoulders or my knee back in the day, and you still work around things with any arguably healthy client. And for you to come from the lens of working with the disabled, and I love seeing that lens that they have to be able to do this, they have to be able to bend down and come back up. So you're really clearly someone who has an knack for this. And I think that's really cool. I think that's awesome that you found that. And, your clients are going to be really lucky to have you, because you're able to then transfer that kind of outside the box thinking to otherwise much more healthier population. I think that's awesome. Why don't you tell more people about your program and kind of what makes it unique?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm a fitness, nutrition, and fat loss coach. So my program involves nutrition along with a strength training regimen. I'm a big believer in steps. I'm kind of all about about habits. I'm about nutrition. I'm about strength training. I'm about movement in the form of steps, hydration, and rest. So I'm going to emphasize habits because I'm wanting people to build it into a lifestyle. I do it in the form of a personal training app. So I do have an app where I deliver strength demos. People have back and forth communication with me. And that's helpful for people who are concerned, that are strength training for the first time. It's a basic program to start out, but something that provides knowledge on overload versus what a lot of women my age have been doing in the past, which was not quite overload. So teaching those aspects, and also helping with understanding that there's always a way to work around something. It's okay if we have an injury that we can't work. I don't want anybody to disrespect their body. So if you've got a shoulder thing and there's certain movements you can't do, that's okay. We find a way to work around it. And that's where that communication comes back and forth for me to be able to suggest, okay, how about this? Would this be a good substitution for you? And we keep working at it until we get there. And my program runs in an 8-week sessions. So I'm starting my next fat loss on April 8th. For this round, running through the end of May. And that's been fun. I've been on a cut myself this year, so I'm going to continue that I went on a short diet break in between, a planned diet break in between while my daughter was in town. And I'm going to I don't always do the fat loss phase with my women. A lot of times I'm in maintenance, but directing them. But this year I started a cut in January, and I'm going to continue it on through this fat loss phase. So that's been fun too, and kind of exciting.
Yeah, it's always nice to hop in with the challenge when you're going to do it.
And
I
you
do
got to
this
have personal goals still,
totally.
So I dropped 10 in my first cut, in my first 3 months cut. And I
Nice.
then went on my diet break, and I thought, okay, maintained through my break. And so now I'm excited to hop back in with them. So
That's
because I
awesome.
feel like it gives that sense of community. It's always a small group with a private Facebook group and all that, but then we can all share stuff together.
Yeah, no, the community is huge, and showing the leader share the battle, I think, is a really big thing, right? It's like, hey, I'm
Yeah,
going through these
always
things,
fun.
and I have the same thing in my group, because I'll say, hey, you know what? I didn't have a perfect week. I this is where I made
Exactly.
my mistakes, and this is where I'm going to change it. And I think it shows that you're just like them, and I think that really helps. But I really appreciate this conversation. It was a lot of fun. I think you gave some great insight, especially with your great experience, how long you've been in the industry. I'm really curious, as this is a Strong Ambition podcast, what is your most recent ambition that you're really excited about? It could be work, personal, anything, life, whatever you're feeling.
Um, Thinking. It's, I guess, kind of twofold. Number one, had just stayed in maintenance last year. I'd done a surplus for a while, and then went through maintenance phase. So one of my ambitions for myself is just that I was excited to go back into a cut. Got engaged this year on New Year's Eve.
Oh,
So I just thought,
congratulations.
thank you. So we're probably headed off somewhere tropical later in the summer or later in the year. So that's why I was like, oh, this will be a perfect time leading in and doing the cut with my clients. So that's one of my ambitions. And really, aside from that, just really to continue empowering women. Like, I want to get the message out there, and I'm just a small little guy. I'm not somebody that has a lot of reach in my posts, but I try and give good info, solid info that's helpful to everybody, whether you're young, old, whether you got injuries or no injuries, man, woman. It's, we're all needing, it's the same basic blueprint of how to do this effectively. But I really want to empower women in that 40s and up range, just because so many of them, like I said, just never really grasped some of these concepts like I hadn't. And to see the difference when you put the pieces together and how to build it into a lifestyle, instead of thinking of it as a sprint. We don't have to lose it quickly. It's better to do the slow and steady, and you can lose quicker or slower depending on what you want to go through within your fat loss phase. And both are doable, but I just want to empower women to take all of it, not to just be driving on nutrition, or just be driving on cardio, or just be driving on strength, but to understand that it needs to be well-rounded and balanced for us to stick with it.
Yeah, the long game is really what you're in it for. It's a really good sentiment I heard recently, and I'm going to be using a lot. And it's, what would you do this 10 years from now? And if you just ask that question, even if it is a fat loss phase, 10 years from now, you'll probably go through another fat loss phase. And if you think, well, no, that sounds terrible, then you probably have a bad plan for yourself. With the exception of someone that's like in a sport that requires it, there's no reason why that shouldn't be the main question that you ask for all the practice that you're having. And I think that's a really good message that more people need. So thank you so much again for hopping on here, Kelly. I'll definitely have you on again in the future in a year or so, and we'll hear more about your cuts and builds. But it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from your perspective from being through the industry for so long. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, have a good one.
Thank you so much to Kelly. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I think it's great to get some insight from an older woman to talk about older women's health, because as much as I can speculate, I haven't been through it, and she's been through it, and that's what's going to make her more of an expert based on the experience level. But she did say exactly what I believe, which is The blueprint is never any different, but what she has the insight on is helping you with a mindset and giving you more clarity that it's just going to be more difficult for you if you're a woman in your 40s or 50s, perimenopausal or menopausal. And all the fundamental things are still there. You need your protein, you need to still strength train, you still need to have the right amount of calories, and still need to understand all the same fundamentals, but to be able to manage all the different mental things on the way. And I thought it was really good to hear her talk about a little bit of body composition and body image, and to let go of the skinny body mindset, because there's many different body shapes and sizes, and we don't always have to look at one size fits all. We have to really see our own on this fitness spectrum. And I think that's super helpful for people to hear. I really loved her honesty pants. I do also use some sort of clothing as a recommendation for my clients, because it is the most honest thing. And you're going to know a lot about your body weight and size. As I'd mentioned on the podcast, if you maintain improving strength as you're losing weight, you're probably maintaining most of your muscle tissue. And so then you can still use the scale and other simple measures. You don't have to know the exact body fat percentage to know if you're in the right direction, as long as you're looking at some of these other metrics. And I think it's super helpful to hear this perspective of yoga that I hadn't heard someone use before, that it's a continuum and it depends on the context of the movement. There are also certain movements that even if I did, I would actually be weak at the far end range. So it would be strength for that part of the movement pattern. So I think it's very good that she also addressed, but is there progressive overload? Like, is it that kind of strength? And so I think it's super helpful to look at yoga in that sort of lens. And it's just a really cool story that she has overall. I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. I really did. I thought it gave a great perspective on someone from her generation. Again, been through the fitness industry for a very long time, and she's come to realize a lot of the same things. So it's really good to hear her perspective. And don't hesitate to check out Kelly Kauffman on her Instagram. It's Kelly Kauffman Fitness. I'll leave it in the show notes. And she also has a Facebook page. You can search her up, and also will be in the show notes as far as how to search her up on Facebook. But I highly recommend you check out her stuff if you're interested in, fitness for women in their 40s and 50s. And thanks again for Kelly to be on. And thank you for listening. As you know, I always want to help you within your own fitness and nutrition goals. And I just appreciate you as a listener. So I would really appreciate any sort of a review you could give, as it helps my little podcast slowly grow. But I just appreciate you listening. So thanks for listening, as I'm just here to try to help you with your own ambition, because life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather the happiness within the pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.